There is a moment near the end of Rose's Scabbard where nobody speaks. Pearl stands at the edge of a cliff, and Stephen has just climbed up after her, exhausted and scraped and small. The wind moves through the grass. The sky stretches out behind them in that particular shade of pink the show reserves for moments that are supposed to hurt. And Pearl does not say anything. She does not explain herself. She does not apologize. She just stands there, looking out at nothing, and the nothing is so loud that it fills the entire frame. What is missing from this scene is the person Pearl wants to be standing there with. What is missing is Rose, and what makes that absence so devastating is not that Rose is dead. It is that Pearl has nowhere to put the love she still carries. She has been holding it for thousands of years, and it has not gotten any lighter. It has only gotten quieter. That is what this video is about. Pearl is, by almost any measure, the most tragic character in modern animation. Not because she lost someone she loved. People lose people. Stories are full of that. Pearl is tragic because she built her entire identity around a person who is gone, and now she has to exist inside the shape that person left behind. Her grief is not a chapter in her story. It is the story. It is the architecture of who she is. And tonight we are going to sit with that for a while. We are going to trace the full arc of Pearl, from the moment she was made to the moment she finally begins to let go, and we are going to ask what it means to love someone so completely that you forget to become yourself. Welcome to Futuro, by the way. If you are new here, this is what we do. Let us begin where she begins, not on Earth, not beside Rose, but on Homeworld, in a factory where she was made to be nothing. To understand Pearl, you have to understand what a Pearl is, not who, what. Because on Homeworld, pearls are not people. They are objects. They are accessories. They are the living equivalent of a handbag or a decorative pin, custom made to stand beside someone important and make that someone look more important by comparison. They do not fight. They do not think independently. They do not have ambitions or opinions or desires. They exist to hold things, to look pretty, to follow orders, and to never, under any circumstances, be more than what they were designed to be. This is not subtext. The show makes it explicit. In Back to the Barn, the 20th episode of the second season, which aired on October 8th, 2015, Peridot lays it out with the casual cruelty of someone stating an obvious fact. She tells Pearl, directly and without malice, that pearls are servants, that they are made to order, that a pearl belongs to whoever commissioned her, the way a piece of furniture belongs to the person who bought it. And the thing that makes this scene so uncomfortable is not Peridot's bluntness. It is the fact that Pearl does not argue, not really. She flinches, she deflects. She tries to prove herself through action rather than words. But she does not say Peridot is wrong because Peridot is not wrong. That is what Pearl was made to be. That is the truth she has been running from for thousands of years. And hearing it spoken aloud in front of Stephen, in front of the people she has tried so hard to be more for, cuts through every wall she has built. Think about what that means. Pearl was manufactured. She was not born. She was not raised. She did not grow up in a family or a community and gradually discover who she was. She was produced, the way you produce a tool, with a specific function and a specific owner, and absolutely no expectation that she would ever want anything beyond that function. Her entire species, if you can even call it a species, exists in a state of intentional subjugation. They are made to serve, and the system that makes them does not even consider the possibility that they might object, because objecting is not part of the programming. They are designed without the capacity for ambition, or at least that is the idea, that is the theory. But something went wrong with our Pearl, or, depending on how you look at it, something went exactly right. Because our Pearl did want more. Our Pearl looked at the diamond she was made to serve, Pink Diamond, the youngest and least respected of the Diamond Authority, and she did not just see an owner, she saw a person. She saw someone who was also trapped, also constrained, also told what to be and how to be it and never allowed to deviate. And in that recognition, something shifted. Something that was not supposed to be possible became possible. Pearl began to want, not just to serve, not just to stand in the right place and hold the right things and look appropriately decorative. She began to want a life that was hers. She began to want freedom, and more than anything, she began to want Rose. This is the first layer of Pearl's tragedy, and it is one the show handles with extraordinary care. Pearl's rebellion against Homeworld is genuine. It is brave. It is, in every meaningful sense, an act of liberation. She looks at the system that created her, the system that told her she was nothing, and she says no. She picks up a sword which pearls are never supposed to touch. She learns to fight, which pearls are never supposed to do. She stands beside Rose Quartz and wages a war against the most powerful empire in the galaxy. And she does it not because she was ordered to, but because she chose to. That choice is real. It matters. It changed the course of the entire war and the entire show. But here is the thing that makes it complicated. The thing that makes Pearl's story so much more nuanced than a simple narrative of empowerment. Pearl did not rebel for herself. She rebelled for Rose. She did not pick up that sword because she decided she deserved to be free. She picked it up because Rose believed she deserved to be free, and Pearl believed in Rose more than she believed in anything, including herself. The liberation was real, but it was second-hand. It was borrowed. It was built on the foundation of another person's conviction. And that foundation, as we will eventually learn, was not as solid as Pearl thought it was. This is not a criticism of Pearl. It is a description of how trauma works. When you have been told your entire life, from the literal moment of your creation, that you are nothing, that you exist only in relation to someone else, you do not suddenly develop an independent sense of self just because someone tells you that you matter. You transfer, you take the devotion you were built to feel, and you redirect it. The object changes, but the pattern does not. Pearl went from serving Pink Diamond because she was manufactured to serving Rose Quartz because she wanted to, and she mistook the change in motivation for a change in structure. She thought she was free because the cage was prettier. She thought she was choosing because the choice felt like love, and to be clear, it was love. Rebecca Sugar, who created Steven Universe and who guided the show from its premiere on November 4th, 2013 through its finale on January the 21st, 2019, has confirmed that Pearl and Rose had reciprocal romantic feelings. This was not one-sided worship. Rose loved Pearl back, but the shape of that love, the way Pearl held it, the way she let it define her entirely, that was the inheritance of a system that had taught her she could only exist as an extension of someone else. Homeworld built that into her. Rose could not undo it just by loving her in return, and so Pearl trades one world for another. She leaves Homeworld, leaves everything she was made for, and she follows Rose to Earth. She fights a war that lasts 1,000 years. She watches friends shatter and reform and shatter again. She stands on battlefields that will eventually become kindergartens and strawberry fields and quiet places where grass grows over the scars. And through all of it, she is right there, at Rose's side, exactly where a Pearl is supposed to be. The irony is so precise it almost feels intentional on the part of the writers, and knowing Sugar's attention to thematic detail, it probably is. Pearl escapes the role she was made for, only to recreate it in a different context. She is no longer a servant, she is a knight. But the underlying dynamic, the complete orientation of her being around another person, remains unchanged. There is an episode in the first season called Space Race. It is the 28th episode, and it aired on October 9th, 2014. In it, Pearl and Steven try to build a spaceship. On the surface, it is a fun, light episode about a kid and his alien caretaker attempting something ambitious. But underneath that, it is one of the most revealing episodes about Pearl in the entire series. Because what drives Pearl in this episode is not curiosity or adventure, it is longing. She wants to go back to space. She wants to see the stars the way she used to see them. From the deck of a ship, moving through the cosmos with purpose and direction. And as the episode progresses, that longing becomes desperate. It becomes reckless. She puts Steven in genuine danger because the pull of what she lost is stronger than her judgment. And what she lost is not just space. It is the life she had with Rose, out there, among the stars, before everything collapsed into this small town, on this small planet where she has to pretend to be something she does not entirely know how to be. This is the dual nature of Pearl's choice, and it is what makes her arc so much more honest than most redemption stories in animation. Her rebellion was liberation. It was real, it was meaningful, and it mattered. But it was also the beginning of a different kind of imprisonment. She freed herself from Homeworld's caste system, only to imprison herself inside her devotion to Rose. She stopped being property and started being a partner, but she never stopped defining herself through someone else. The cage changed shape. It did not disappear, and for thousands of years that was fine. It did not feel like a cage because Rose was there, and Rose made everything feel like freedom. The problem, the slow-burning catastrophe at the center of Pearl's story, is that Rose is not there anymore. Rose gave up her physical form to create Steven, and Pearl was left standing in the wreckage of an identity that only made sense in relation to someone who no longer exists. She is a knight without a queen. She is a reflection without a source. She is a love letter with no one left to read it. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And then there is the secret, the one Pearl carried for thousands of years, pressed against her chest like a stone, unable to put it down, unable to show it to anyone, unable to even speak it aloud, because Rose Quartz was not who she said she was. Rose Quartz was Pink Diamond, the rebellion, the war, the entire mythology of a brave quartz soldier who stood up against the diamonds and fought for Earth's freedom. All of it was a performance. Pink Diamond, the youngest diamond, the one the others dismissed and belittled and refused to take seriously, faked her own shattering and took on a new identity. She became Rose Quartz. She led a rebellion against herself, and Pearl knew from the very beginning, because Pearl was there. Pearl helped her do it. Pearl held the sword. Pearl was the only one who knew the full truth, and Pink Diamond made sure she could never tell anyone. This is where the hands come in. Throughout the series, there are moments where Pearl tries to speak about certain things and physically cannot. Her hands rise to her mouth, unbidden, and cover it. She does not choose to stay silent. Silence is forced upon her, encoded into her by a direct order from Pink Diamond. Pink told Pearl never to reveal her true identity, and because of the hierarchical structure of Gem Society, because a diamond's command is absolute, because Pearl was made to obey, that order became permanent. It was not a request. It was not a promise Pearl chose to keep out of loyalty, though she might have kept it anyway. It was a compulsion. It was written into her being, the way gravity is written into matter. She could not disobey it even if she wanted to, and she did want to. That is the cruelest part. Imagine carrying a secret for 5,000 years. Imagine watching the people you love, the people you fight beside, the people you would die for. Imagine watching them build their entire understanding of the world on a lie that you could correct with a single sentence. Imagine watching Garnet, who joined the rebellion because she believed in Rose's vision of freedom and equality. Imagine watching her base her identity on a version of events that is fundamentally incomplete. Imagine watching Amethyst struggle with her origins, feeling lesser because she emerged from the earth rather than being made on Homeworld, not knowing that the person she idolizes was a diamond all along, one of the very beings who created the system that makes Amethyst feel small. Imagine watching Steven, Rose's son, your leader's child, grow up confused and burdened by a legacy he does not fully understand, and knowing that you hold the key to his understanding in your mouth, right behind your hands, and you cannot open them, you cannot speak, you can only watch. That is Pearl's existence for thousands of years. That is the shape of her silence. And the show does not rush the reveal. It lets us sit with Pearl's discomfort for seasons. It lets us notice the hand gesture without explaining it. It lets us feel the weight of the secret before we know what the secret is. And then in a single pale rose, the 18th episode of the 5th season, which aired on May 7th, 2018, the truth finally surfaces. Not through Pearl speaking. She still cannot speak. Instead, Steven enters Pearl's gem, travels through layers of her memory, each one deeper and more painful than the last, and he finds it himself. He sees Pink Diamond. He sees Pearl. He sees the moment the order was given, the moment silence was imposed, and he understands finally what Pearl has been carrying. The structure of that episode is worth sitting with for a moment. Stephen does not just find a memory. He descends through Pearl's mind like someone moving through geological strata, each layer representing a different version of Pearl, a different era of her pain. There is the surface Pearl, organized and precise. There is the Pearl who remembers the early days with Stephen, trying to be a mother to a child who is also a reminder of everything she lost. There is the Pearl who remembers the war. And at the very bottom, at the deepest layer, there is the Pearl who stood beside Pink Diamond and was told to be silent forever. The architecture of the episode mirrors the architecture of repression. The truth is not hidden behind a door. It is buried under years of coping, of performing normalcy, of building a self on top of a void. And here is what elevates this from a clever plot twist to something genuinely devastating. The order Pink Diamond gave Pearl was not just cruel, it was the single most damaging thing Rose ever did to the person who loved her most. Think about it. Rose preached freedom. Rose started a war because she believed every being had the right to be who they truly were. Rose told Pearl she was more than a servant, more than property, more than the role Homeworld assigned her. And then Rose turned around and used the one power she had over Pearl, the hierarchical authority of a diamond over her pearl, to silence her. She used the very system she claimed to be fighting against. She enforced obedience using the exact mechanism of control that she said she wanted to destroy. The hypocrisy is staggering, and the show does not flinch from it. Rose is not a villain. She is not evil. She is a person who wanted to do the right thing, but could not escape her own patterns, could not see the way she was replicating the structures she opposed. She freed Pearl from Homeworld, and then bound her with a chain that was, in some ways, worse, because this chain was invisible, and it was given in the name of love. Pearl could not tell anyone what she knew. She could not process her grief openly, because her grief was tangled up in a truth she was forbidden to share. She could not explain why she was the way she was, why she clung so tightly, why she fell apart so completely when Rose was gone, because the full explanation required words she was physically incapable of saying. Every conversation about Rose, every memory, every moment of mourning was incomplete. Pearl was forced to grieve in fragments, to feel in half sentences, to exist in a permanent state of almost speaking, and the people around her, the people who loved her, could not understand why she seemed so stuck, why her grief never seemed to move, why she circled the same pain endlessly without ever reaching its center. They could not understand because she could not tell them. The secret was not just a piece of information Pearl was hiding. It was a wall between her and every meaningful connection she tried to build after Rose was gone. It was the reason her grief calcified instead of healing. It was the reason she remained, for thousands of years, exactly where Rose left her, standing at the edge of a cliff, looking out at nothing, with her hands over her mouth and no one left to hear what she could not say. And then Rose is gone, not dead exactly. Gems do not die the way humans do. But Rose Quartz chooses to give up her physical form so that Stephen can exist. She makes this choice knowing it is irreversible, knowing that the gem she has carried for thousands of years will belong to someone else, knowing that the person who loved her most will be left standing in a room with a newborn child and no explanation that could ever be enough. Pearl does not get a goodbye, not really. She gets the knowledge that Rose has chosen this, that Rose wanted this, that this baby is what Rose desired more than anything else in the universe, more than the earth, more than the crystal gems, more than Pearl. And Pearl has to stand there and accept it, because that is what Pearl has always done. She has accepted every decision Rose ever made, even the ones that broke her. But this one is different. Every other sacrifice Pearl made was in service of keeping Rose alive, keeping Rose safe, keeping Rose in the world. And now Rose has voluntarily left it. The person Pearl built her entire existence around has chosen to stop existing, not because of a battle, not because of a threat, because of love. A love for humanity, for Greg, for the possibility of a child, a love that did not include Pearl in its calculus. There is something uniquely cruel about being left behind by someone who chose to go. If Rose had been shattered in battle, Pearl could have mourned a tragedy. She could have directed her grief outward, at the enemy, at the injustice, at the universe. But Rose was not taken. Rose left, and she left for something she wanted more than she wanted to stay. Pearl has to live with that every single day for the rest of her existence. Pearl has to wake up and know that the person she loved most in the world looked at everything they had built together, the rebellion, the crystal gems, the centuries of shared history, and decided it was not enough, that something else was calling, that the future mattered more than the past. There is a moment in the early days of Stephen's life that the show reveals later. In an episode called 3 Gems and a Baby, it takes place during Stephen's first winter. Greg is struggling with this new life, this impossible child who is half human and half gem, and the crystal gems come to visit. Each of them tries to make sense of what Stephen is. Each of them looks at this baby and sees something different. Amethyst sees a shapeshifter. She thinks Rose has simply taken a new form, the way gems do, and she tries to coax her out. Garnet sees a fusion of sorts, 2 beings sharing one form, and she tries to reason with the Rose she believes is still in there. But Pearl looks at Stephen and sees a prison. She believes Rose is trapped inside. She believes that if she can just remove the gem from Stephen's body, Rose will come back. Think about that for a moment. Pearl reaches for a baby's gem, the gem embedded in his stomach, because she cannot accept that Rose chose to leave. The denial is so total, so consuming, that Pearl is willing to risk this child's life on the chance that her interpretation is correct. That Rose did not really choose this. That it was some kind of mistake, some kind of accident, and the person Pearl loves is still in there somewhere, waiting to be freed. She reaches for that gem the way a grieving person might reach for a phone to call someone who has already passed. The body remembers the habit even when the mind knows the truth. Pearl's hands move toward Rose's gem, because for thousands of years, that gem was Rose. That gem was home. The other gems stop her. Stephen is fine. The moment passes, but what it reveals does not pass. It lingers across the entire series, like a bruise that never fully heals. Pearl looked at a baby and did not see a baby. She saw the absence of the person she loved. She saw a body that had taken Rose away from her, and in that moment, love and grief became indistinguishable. Pearl could not mourn Rose because mourning means accepting the loss, and Pearl was not ready to accept anything. She was still bargaining, still reaching for a version of reality where Rose comes back, where the sacrifice is undone, where Pearl does not have to learn how to exist in a world without the person who gave her existence meaning. And the show handles this with such care. It does not condemn Pearl for the impulse. It does not frame her as a villain for reaching toward that gem. It frames her as someone drowning, someone so deep in grief that she cannot tell the difference between saving the person she loves and hurting the child in front of her. The episode is told as a flashback, narrated with the warmth of a winter memory, and that framing is important. It tells you that this moment, as frightening as it was, is part of a larger story. It is not the end. It is the beginning of Pearl learning to see Stephen as his own person, but that learning takes years. It takes the entire series. This is the tragedy that defines Pearl for the first several seasons of the show. She is a character suspended in grief. She takes care of Stephen. She fights alongside Garnet and Amethyst. She maintains the temple. She does all of the things a responsible guardian is supposed to do. But beneath every action, beneath every smile, there is this vast and silent emptiness. Pearl is performing life without living it. She is going through the motions of someone who has moved on, while every private moment reveals she has not moved at all. You can see it in the way she holds Rose's sword, in the way she pauses at Rose's fountain, in the way her voice changes, just slightly, whenever Rose's name comes up. She is present in body and absent in every other way that matters. There is an episode called Stephen the Sword Fighter, where Pearl is training Stephen, and a holographic copy of herself stabs her through the torso. Pearl poofs, her physical form dissipates, and her gem retreats to regenerate. For 2 weeks, Pearl is gone, and Stephen sits there, staring at her gem, waiting. He talks to it. He sets it on a pillow. He does everything a child would do when someone they care about disappears without explanation. And the thing that cuts deepest about this episode is not Stephen's worry. It is the echo, because this is exactly what Pearl has been doing with Rose's memory, except Rose is never coming back. Pearl regenerates. She reforms. She returns to her body and to the people who need her. But the experience leaves a mark on Stephen, this first real taste of what loss feels like. And it mirrors Pearl's own experience in a way the show never has to state explicitly. Stephen waited 2 weeks. Pearl has been waiting for years. And then there is Space Race, where Pearl builds a spaceship. She wants to show Stephen the wonders of the cosmos, the places she has been, the stars she once travelled between. On the surface, it seems like a fun project, a bonding experience between a teacher and a student, but as the episode progresses, something shifts. Pearl becomes consumed by the ship. She becomes reckless. She pushes the craft beyond what is safe, beyond what the materials can handle, and she nearly kills both herself and Stephen in the process. The other gems have to intervene, and when you step back and look at this episode in the context of Pearl's grief, you see something she would never admit aloud. Pearl was trying to leave, not permanently maybe, not consciously, but the sky was calling her, and the sky is where Rose is not. The sky is where the memories do not live. Pearl has spent her entire post-Rose existence surrounded by reminders: the temple, the beach, the sword, the shield, the child who carries Rose's gem in his stomach. And for one afternoon she tried to fly away from all of it. She tried to outrun her own grief at escape velocity. It did not work. It never works. And the show does not rush this. It does not give Pearl a single cathartic episode where she cries and then gets better. Instead, it scatters her grief across dozens of episodes, letting it surface in unexpected ways. A conversation about sword technique becomes a meditation on sacrifice. A trip to the beach becomes a reminder of Rose. A song becomes a confession. Pearl's grief is not a plot point to be resolved. It is the landscape she lives in. It is the air she breathes. And because Steven Universe is a show that trusts its audience, it never explains this grief in a single speech or a single moment. It lets you feel it accumulate. It lets the weight build episode by episode until you realise that Pearl has been carrying this for so long that she has forgotten what it feels like to put it down. The episode that makes this most painfully clear is Rose's Scabbard. If you have seen it, you already know. If you have not, what follows might be the most emotionally devastating 11 minutes in the entire series. It begins simply enough. Stephen finds Rose's scabbard and Pearl is delighted. She knows this object. She knows its history. She begins to talk about Rose's sword, about the battles they fought together, about the war. And for a moment, Pearl is alive in a way she rarely is. She is connected to something. She is the authority, the one who knew Rose best, the one who carries those memories. Her identity in that moment is built on the certainty that she was Rose's closest confidant, that whatever else was true, Pearl knew Rose completely. This is the foundation Pearl has been standing on for thousands of years. Not the memory of Rose's love exactly, but the certainty that Pearl was the one who received it most fully, that she was chosen, that she was special, that among all the people Rose knew and loved, Pearl was the closest. And then Lion reveals a pocket dimension full of Rose's possessions. Things Pearl has never seen, things Pearl did not know existed, a flag, a videotape, objects that represent parts of Rose's life that Pearl was not part of. And just like that, the foundation cracks. You can see it happen in real time. Pearl's expression shifts from confusion to disbelief to something much harder to name. It is not anger, not exactly. It is the realization that the story she told herself, the story that kept her going for thousands of years, might not be the whole truth. Rose had secrets. Rose kept things from her. The person Pearl gave everything for, the person Pearl would have died for without a second thought, had corners of her life that Pearl was never invited invited into. And this is not a small thing. This is not finding out that your partner forgot to mention a minor detail. This is finding out that the person you organised your entire existence around had a whole dimension of experience that you were excluded from. It calls everything into question. If Rose kept this hidden, what else did she keep hidden? If Rose did not share these things with Pearl, then who did she share them with? Or worse, did she share them with no one? Did Rose carry secrets that she trusted to a lion, but not to the person who fought a war for her? Pearl tries to hold it together. She insists that Rose told her everything. She repeats it like a mantra, like saying it enough times will make it true. But the evidence is right there. Lion is right there. And Lion does not answer to Pearl. Lion answers to Stephen. Another reminder that Rose's legacy does not belong to Pearl. It belongs to this child she still has not fully accepted. Pearl breaks. She runs. She climbs to a high cliff, a place connected to the Strawberry battlefield, a place from the war, a place where her memories of Rose are strongest. And she does something that is both beautiful and unbearable to watch. She activates a hologram, a projection of Rose stored in Pearl's gem from thousands of years ago. The hologram speaks. It says something simple, something about the beauty of the earth. And Pearl stands there, face to face with a ghost she generated herself, and you realise that Pearl has probably done this before, that in all those quiet moments when the others were not watching, Pearl has been replaying these fragments, these scraps of Rose's voice and image, trying to keep something alive that is already gone. It is the gem equivalent of reading old text messages, of playing a voicemail just to hear someone's voice, of looking at photographs not to remember, but to pretend for just a second that the person is still there. Stephen follows her to the cliff. He struggles to reach her. He climbs the rocky face, slipping, catching himself, pulling himself up ledge by ledge, and for a terrible moment you are not sure Pearl even notices. She is so consumed by her own grief that the child she is supposed to protect is dangling from a ledge below her. The camera holds on this. It lets you feel the tension. Stephen is in danger, real danger, and Pearl is standing 10 feet above him, lost in a conversation with a hologram. This is what grief does when it goes unprocessed for too long. It makes you blind to the people who are still alive. It makes the dead more real than the living. But she does reach for him. She does pull him up. And then comes the scene that matters most. Stephen sits next to Pearl on the cliff. He does not say anything profound. He does not try to fix her or explain away her pain. He does not pretend to understand what it is like to love someone for thousands of years and lose them. He simply says that he knows he is not Rose, but that he is still there, that Pearl still has him. And Pearl breaks down completely. She collapses into Stephen and cries, and he holds her. This child holding this ancient being, this boy who is half the person Pearl lost, and neither of them has the answers the other needs, but they have each other, and for that moment it is enough. The embrace lasts a long time. The show holds on it. There is no rush to the next scene, no comedic beat to break the tension. Just two people sitting on a cliff above a battlefield where thousands of gems were shattered, holding each other in the dark. And this is where Steven Universe does something that very few shows aimed at children are willing to do. It sits with the pain. It does not resolve it. It does not offer a lesson or a moral or a neat conclusion. It just lets two people be sad together and trusts that the audience understands why that matters. What Rose's Scabbard reveals is the limit of devotion. Pearl gave Rose everything. Her service, her loyalty, her love, her entire sense of self, and Rose accepted all of it. But Rose also had a life beyond Pearl. Rose had thoughts she did not share, objects she kept hidden, a future she planned without consulting the person who loved her most. This does not make Rose cruel. It makes her a complete person. But for Pearl, whose entire identity was built on being the one closest to Rose, the discovery that closeness had boundaries is devastating. It means the sacrifice was not perfectly reciprocated. It means Pearl gave everything and received almost everything, and that almost is an abyss she cannot cross. You can give someone your whole heart and they can love you back deeply, sincerely, with genuine feeling, and still keep a room locked that you will never enter. That is not betrayal, that is personhood. But it feels like betrayal when you have emptied yourself so completely that there is nothing left to stand on. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The grief does not stay contained. That is the nature of unprocessed pain. It leaks into everything. It shapes how Pearl teaches, how she fights, how she relates to the people around her. And nowhere is this more visible than in the way Pearl trains Connie Maheswaran to fight. In the episode Sworn to the Sword, Pearl takes on the role of sword instructor. Connie wants to learn how to fight alongside Stephen, how to protect him, how to be useful in the battles that seem to find him no matter where he goes. And Pearl agrees to teach her. On the surface, this is a generous act. Pearl is one of the most skilled sword fighters on Earth. She has thousands of years of combat experience. She is the perfect teacher. She knows angles of attack, defensive stances, footwork patterns that no human being has ever practiced. If anyone can turn Connie into a capable fighter, it is Pearl. But the lesson she teaches is not swordsmanship. Not really. What Pearl teaches Connie is self-sacrifice. She teaches Connie that the purpose of a knight is to protect the person they serve, no matter the cost. That Connie's life is less important than Stephen's. That the highest honor is to throw yourself between the person you love and the thing that would destroy them, even if it destroys you instead. Pearl does not frame this as ideology. She frames it as technique. She frames it as strategy. But the choreography tells the truth. In training sequence after training sequence, Connie is taught to take the hit, to absorb the blow, to treat her own body as a shield. The movements Pearl drills into Connie are not defensive maneuvers designed to keep both fighters safe. They are interception patterns. They are designed to put Connie's body between danger and Stephen. They are designed to make Connie expendable, and Connie, to her credit, absorbs it all. She is young and eager and wants so badly to be useful, to be worthy, to prove that a human being can stand alongside gems and hold her own. She does not question the philosophy because it comes wrapped in skill, in discipline, in the authority of someone she respects. Pearl is not teaching her to die. Pearl is teaching her to serve. And service, in Pearl's framework, has always been indistinguishable from self-destruction. The song that accompanies this training is called Do It For Her, and it functions on two levels simultaneously. On the surface, Pearl is singing about doing it for Connie's sake, training hard, becoming strong, protecting the people you love. But the visuals tell a different story. As Pearl sings, images of Rose appear. The her in the title shifts. Pearl is not just teaching Connie a philosophy of combat. She is reliving her own history. She is passing down the exact pattern of devotion that defined her relationship with Rose. Do it for her. Sacrifice for her. Make yourself small so she can be great. Disappear so she can shine. The song is a lullaby and a warning at the same time. It is the sound of trauma being inherited, passed from one generation to the next, not through malice but through muscle memory. And the devastating part is that Pearl does not realize what she is doing. She genuinely believes she is helping Connie. She genuinely believes that this is what love looks like. Total surrender, total service, the willingness to be nothing so that someone else can be everything. Pearl is not teaching Connie to fight. She is teaching Connie to become another Pearl. She is creating a copy of her own pain and handing it to a child and calling it a gift. This is how cycles perpetuate, not through cruelty, but through sincerity. The most dangerous lessons are the ones taught by people who believe them completely. Stephen sees it. He watches the training and recognizes the pattern, even if he cannot fully articulate it. He sees Connie throwing herself into harm's way, with a smile on her face, and something in him recoils. He intervenes. He tells Connie that he does not want her to sacrifice herself for him, that he wants to fight alongside her, not behind her, that her life matters just as much as his. And this confrontation forces Pearl to face something she has been avoiding for a very long time. The possibility that her model of love is broken, that what she had with Rose was not the ideal she has been worshipping. That devotion without self-worth is not love, it is erasure. Stephen holds up a mirror and Pearl sees herself in it, and for a moment she cannot look away. This connects directly to something that surfaces earlier in the series, in an episode called Coach Stephen. In that episode, Pearl watches Garnet and Amethyst fuse into Sugilite, a massive, powerful, uncontrollable fusion, voiced with the kind of raw energy that shakes the ground. And Pearl feels small. Physically small, yes, but also existentially small. She cannot match Sugilite's raw strength. She cannot compete with that kind of power. She is precise where Sugilite is overwhelming. She is calculated where Sugilite is chaotic. And she sings a song called Strong in the Real Way, where she tries to articulate a different kind of strength, discipline, grace, precision, the strength of the mind rather than the body, the strength that comes from control rather than force. But the song is also a confession. Pearl is trying to convince herself as much as anyone else. She knows she is not the strongest gem. She knows that in the hierarchy of raw power she falls short. And this insecurity is not new. It is ancient. It goes all the way back to Homeworld, where pearls were decorative objects, where her entire class was defined by fragility and service. Pearl has spent thousands of years trying to prove that she is more than what she was made to be, and every time she encounters someone stronger, faster, bigger, that old programming whispers to her. It tells her she is just a pearl. It tells her that her worth comes not from who she is, but from who she serves. Strong in the Real Way is Pearl, trying to drown out that whisper with melody. It is her trying to redefine strength on her own terms, but the fact that she has to try so hard, the fact that it takes a song to convince herself, tells you everything about how deep the doubt runs. This is the thread that connects everything. The grief over Rose, the training of Connie, the insecurity about her own strength. Pearl does not know how to value herself independently. She has always defined her worth through her relationship to someone else. First to Homeworld, then to Rose, and now in Rose's absence she is adrift. She clings to the memory of Rose the way she once clung to Rose herself, because without that anchor, Pearl does not know who she is, and the tragedy is circular. Pearl's devotion to Rose was born from a desire to be more than what Homeworld said she was. She wanted to prove that a Pearl could be a warrior, a strategist, a person of consequence. But the way she proved it was by attaching herself to someone else's cause, someone else's war, someone else's dream. She escaped one form of servitude by entering another. She stopped serving a diamond and started serving a quartz. And the love was real, and the choice was genuine, but the structure was the same. Pearl at the side of someone greater. Pearl finding meaning through proximity to power. Pearl as an extension of someone else's story, rather than the author of her own. And that is perhaps the most painful thing about Pearl's story. It is not that she lost the person she loved. It is that she lost herself in the loving so completely and so willingly that when the person was gone, there was nothing left to find. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And then there is the Sardonyx incident. This is the one that breaks something between Pearl and Garnet. The one that reveals just how deep Pearl's need for connection runs. The one that takes her grief and her insecurity and her longing and twists them into something that looks a lot like addiction. Here is what happens. Peridot has been using a communication hub to broadcast signals to Homeworld. The crystal gems need to destroy it, and the most effective way to do that is for Garnet and Pearl to fuse into Sardonyx. Now, Sardonyx is a particular kind of fusion. She is elegant, powerful, theatrical, a performer who commands attention simply by existing. She has Garnet's strength and Pearl's precision combined into something greater than either. When Pearl and Garnet combine, the result is everything Pearl wishes she could be on her own. Confident, strong, worthy of attention, worthy of admiration. Sardonyx does not doubt herself. Sardonyx does not carry the weight of inadequacy that Pearl carries every single day. Sardonyx does not lie awake at night replaying conversations with someone who is gone. Sardonyx is too busy being magnificent, so Pearl does something she knows is wrong. She secretly rebuilds the communication hub after each time that they destroy it. She sneaks out. She repairs the tower. She creates the problem so that Garnet will suggest the solution. She manufactures crisis after crisis so that she can keep fusing with Garnet, keep becoming Sardonyx, keep feeling that rush of wholeness, that she cannot access on her own. Each time she pretends to be surprised. Each time she suggests fusion as if it is a strategic necessity rather than a personal craving. Each time she lies to Garnet's face. It is manipulation. There is no gentler word for it. Pearl is deceiving Garnet, using her, exploiting the trust between them so that she can chase a feeling. And when Garnet finds out, when Garnet realizes that the communication hub keeps rebuilding because Pearl is rebuilding it, the fury is absolute. Garnet does not yell in the way you might expect. She goes cold. She refuses to speak to Pearl. She refuses to fuse with her. She refuses to even look at her. And for Garnet, who is herself a permanent fusion of ruby and sapphire, who values trust and consent above almost everything, this betrayal is not small. It cuts to the core of what fusion means. Fusion is intimacy. Fusion is consent. Fusion is the choice to share yourself completely with another person. And Pearl corrupted that. She turned fusion from an act of mutual trust into a fix. She turned Garnet from a partner into a supplier. But what makes this storyline more than a simple betrayal arc is the why. Pearl did not do this out of malice. She did not do it to hurt Garnet. She did it because she was hurting so badly herself that she could not stop. The void Rose left inside Pearl did not shrink with time. It grew, and Pearl discovered that fusion, specifically fusion with someone as stable and powerful as Garnet, could temporarily fill that void. For the minutes that Sardonyx existed, Pearl did not feel empty. She did not feel like a servant without a master. She did not feel small or fragile or decorative. She felt complete. She felt like someone who mattered not because of who she served, but because of who she was. And that feeling was so intoxicating, so overwhelmingly good after years of grief and self-doubt, that Pearl could not give it up. Even when she knew it was wrong, even when she could see what she was doing, she could not stop. This is addiction in its purest emotional form, not a substance but a feeling, not a drug but a relationship dynamic. Pearl was using Garnet the way someone might use anything that numbs the pain, compulsively, secretly, with full knowledge that it is wrong and a total inability to stop. The shame was there from the beginning. Pearl knew she was lying. She knew she was betraying Garnet's trust. But the alternative was to sit with the emptiness, to feel the full weight of Rose's absence, to confront the question she had been avoiding since the day Stephen was born. Who am I without someone to serve? And Pearl was not ready for that question. She was not ready to face the possibility that the answer might be no one. When Garnet cuts her off, when the fusion is taken away, Pearl does not get angry. She does not defend herself. She collapses. Because without the fusion, the emptiness comes back, and this time it brings shame with it. Now she has lost Rose and she has lost Garnet's trust, and she has lost the one thing that made the loss bearable. She is alone in a way she has never been before, and being alone is the thing Pearl fears most in the universe. The resolution comes in an episode called Friendship, where Pearl and Garnet are forced to work together inside a trap set by Peridot. They are stuck, physically and emotionally, and the walls are literally closing in. There is no room for avoidance. There is no space for silence. They have to talk or they're going to be crushed. And Pearl says something that is both a confession and a diagnosis. She says, essentially, that she is just a Pearl. She says it as an explanation, as an excuse, as a statement of fundamental identity. Just a Pearl. I was made to serve. I was made to stand behind someone greater. I do not know how to be anything on my own. It is not self-pity. It is something worse. It is belief. Pearl genuinely believes this about herself. After thousands of years of rebellion, after centuries of fighting alongside the strongest warriors in the galaxy, after proving again and again that she is skilled and brave and capable, Pearl still believes she is just a Pearl. The programming runs that deep. The wound is that old, and Garnet does not accept it. She does not let Pearl reduce herself to her caste. She tells Pearl that she values her, that Pearl's strength and dedication are not weaknesses, but that they need to be directed honestly. But she also does not pretend the betrayal did not happen. Forgiveness here is not erasure. It is the decision to move forward despite the wound, knowing the scar will remain. Garnet does not say everything is fine. She says they can work on it, and there is a world of of difference between those two things. What the Sardonyx arc reveals is the pattern that defines Pearl's entire existence. She seeks worth through connection to someone she perceives as greater than herself. On Homeworld, it was her diamond. During the rebellion, it was Rose. After Rose's death, it becomes Garnet. Briefly, desperately, destructively. Pearl does not know how to stand alone. She does not know how to look in the mirror and see someone who is enough. Every relationship she builds is structured around the same architecture. She gives, she serves, she sacrifices, and in return she receives a sense of purpose that she cannot generate internally. The object of devotion changes, but the devotion itself never does. Pearl is always kneeling. She just changes who she kneels before, and the Sardonyx incident is the moment the show makes this pattern undeniable. Before this arc, you could argue that Pearl's devotion to Rose was healthy, that it was simply the way Pearl loved, that there was nothing destructive about it. But the Sardonyx incident takes the same impulse, the need to merge with someone greater, the need to lose herself in someone else, and strips away the romanticism. It shows you what Pearl's love looks like without Rose to give it shape. It is desperate, it is dishonest, it is harmful, and it is not because Pearl is a bad person. It is because Pearl was never taught to love in a way that does not require erasing herself. This is not a flaw that gets fixed in a single episode. It is not a lesson Pearl learns once and then moves beyond. It is the central struggle of her character across the entire series. This slow and painful process of learning that worth does not come from someone else, that the value of a life is not determined by who that life is dedicated to, that a Pearl, any Pearl, is not just a reflection of the person she serves. She is her own light if she can ever bring herself to believe it. And that is what makes Pearl's story so difficult to watch and so impossible to forget. She is not fighting a villain. She is not saving the world, not primarily. She is fighting the voice inside her own head that tells her she is nothing without someone else. She is fighting thousands of years of programming, thousands of years of being told she is decorative, thousands of years of believing that love means disappearing into another person. And every time she wins a small victory, every time she asserts herself, every time she admits she needs help, every time she chooses to stay instead of running, it matters. It matters because it is real. Because anyone who has ever felt like their worth depends on someone else's attention knows exactly what Pearl is going through. And anyone who has ever watched someone they love choose something else, choose someone else, knows the particular shape of Pearl's grief. She is standing at the edge of a cliff, projecting a ghost from her own forehead, talking to someone who is not there. And slowly, painfully, one episode at a time, she is learning to turn around and walk back toward the people who are. And then there is Greg. It is easy from a distance to see Greg Universe as a minor character in Pearl's story, a human, a musician who showed up one day with a van and a guitar and somehow ended up at the center of everything. But Greg is not minor to Pearl. Greg is, in many ways, the person Pearl fears most in the entire world. Not because he is powerful, not because he is dangerous, but because Rose chose him, and that single fact rearranges everything Pearl believed about herself. To understand the full weight of this, we need to go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the war or the beginning of Earth, the beginning of Greg and Rose. The show gives us this in Story for Stephen, which aired in April of 2015, and what it reveals is striking. Greg is young. He is a travelling musician with long hair and a lot of confidence. He plays a concert on the beach. Rose Quartz shows up, enormous and radiant, and she is captivated by him. She is fascinated the way she is fascinated by everything on Earth, with a kind of warm, wide-eyed wonder that does not distinguish between a sunset and a human being. And Greg, to his credit, is captivated right back. But watch Pearl in this episode. Watch her carefully, because from the very first moment Greg enters Rose's orbit, Pearl's body language changes. She is stiff. She is dismissive. She looks at Greg the way you might look at a stain on something you love, not with rage, with quiet, controlled disdain. She does not yell. She does not make a scene. She simply makes it clear, through every gesture and every word, that Greg is temporary, that he is one of many humans Rose has found amusing over the centuries, that he will pass, as they all have. And here is the thing. Pearl is not wrong about the pattern. Rose has had human companions before. She is drawn to humans. She finds them beautiful and fascinating and fleeting. Pearl knows this. She has watched it happen before, watched Rose fall in love with the novelty of a human life, and then watched that human grow old and disappear while Rose remained unchanged. Pearl has outlasted every single one of them. That is her advantage. That is her claim. No matter who Rose finds interesting today, Pearl is the one who is still there tomorrow. Pearl is the one who is always there. So when Greg shows up, Pearl is not panicking. Not at first. She is simply waiting. She has seen this before. She knows how it ends. Greg will age. Greg will leave. Greg will die. And Pearl will remain, the way Pearl always remains. But something about Greg is different, and Pearl can feel it even before she can name it. Rose is not just amused by Greg. She is not just fascinated the way she is fascinated by butterflies or thunderstorms. She is interested, genuinely, specifically interested in who he is. And that distinction, that subtle shift from general wonder to particular attention, is enough to make Pearl's composure start to fracture. We Need to Talk, which aired in June of 2015, takes this fracture and splits it wide open. The episode is structured as a flashback, narrated by Greg, and it centers on a specific moment in the early days of his relationship with Rose. He is trying to connect with her, trying to move past the surface level admiration and reach something real. And he is struggling because Rose treats him with a kind of benevolent distance, the way you might treat a particularly charming animal. She loves him, but she does not quite see him as an equal, not yet. And Pearl knows this. Pearl sees the gap between Rose and Greg, and she decides to exploit it. What happens next is one of the most emotionally complex scenes in the entire series. Greg is playing music, Rose is enjoying it, and Pearl steps in, looks directly at Greg, and asks Rose to dance. Rose agrees because Rose always agrees to dance. And then Pearl and Rose fuse, right there, in front of Greg. They become Rainbow Quartz, this dazzling, graceful, four-armed figure who moves with a kind of effortless elegance that Greg, standing there with his guitar, cannot possibly match. And Pearl knows exactly what she is doing. Fusion, in Steven Universe, intimacy. It is trust and vulnerability and connection made physical. When two gems fuse, they are sharing everything. Their thoughts, their feelings, their very sense of self. It is the closest two beings can be. And Pearl performs this act of ultimate closeness right in front of Greg. Not because she wants to fuse with Rose in that moment, but because she wants Greg to see it. She wants him to understand what he is up against. She wants him to know that no matter how many songs he writes, no matter how many nights he spends on the beach, he will never be able to do this. He will never be able to share himself with Rose the way Pearl can. He is human. He is limited. He is, in Pearl's eyes, fundamentally insufficient. The cruelty of it is precise and deliberate. Pearl is not lashing out blindly. She is constructing an argument. She is using fusion as proof. Look at what Rose and I can be together, she is saying. Look at what you can never be. And then she says it out loud. She tells Greg that Rose's interest in him is just a phase, that Rose has had humans before, that they come and go, and Rose barely notices. The words are calm, almost pitying. Pearl delivers them the way you deliver a fact, not an opinion, as if she is doing Greg a kindness by telling him the truth before he gets too attached. But here is what Pearl does not realize, or perhaps what she realizes and cannot accept. She is not just fighting for Rose, she is fighting for meaning. If Rose can love Greg, truly love him, the way Pearl loves Rose, then something Pearl has believed for thousands of years begins to crumble. Pearl gave up everything for Rose. She abandoned her purpose, defied her diamond, rewrote her entire existence. She did all of this, every bit of it, because Rose was the center of her universe. Because being chosen by Rose, being loved by Rose, was worth any sacrifice, any suffering, any loss. But if Rose can feel that same love for a human she met last year, then what does Pearl's sacrifice mean? If Rose's love is not rare, if it is not reserved for the one who earned it through millennia of devotion, then Pearl did not earn anything. She just happened to be there. And the idea that her suffering was not special, that her devotion was not uniquely valuable, is more terrifying to Pearl than any war she has ever fought. This is the deeper truth beneath the rivalry. Pearl is not jealous of Greg because she wants Rose's attention. She is jealous of Greg because his existence threatens the story she tells herself about why her pain matters. If Rose can love freely, love widely, love a human with a van, as easily as she loves the soldier who shattered her own identity for her, then Pearl's entire framework of meaning collapses. And Pearl, who has already lost her homeworld, her purpose and her diamond, cannot afford to lose her meaning too. Greg, for his part, does something extraordinary in We Need to Talk. He does not compete with Pearl. He does not try to fuse. He does not try to prove that he is better or closer or more deserving. Instead, he goes to Rose and tells her the truth. He tells her that he needs her to see him as a real person, not a novelty, not a phase, not a pet, a person. And Rose, for perhaps the first time, truly listens. She looks at Greg, not with wonder but with recognition. She sees him, and in that moment the dynamic shifts permanently. Pearl loses this battle. Not because Greg fights harder, but because Greg asks for something Pearl never does. He asks to be seen as himself. Pearl never asks Rose to see her. Pearl asks Rose to need her. And there is a vast, aching difference between those two requests. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And so we arrive at the song that, for many viewers, defines Pearl entirely. The song that took a character who was already complex, already layered, already heartbreaking, and stripped her down to something so raw and so honest that it is almost difficult to watch. Mr. Greg airs in July of 2016, and it is a musical episode. Stephen, Pearl and Greg go to Empire City after Greg comes into a large sum of money. They stay in a fancy hotel. Stephen is excited. Greg is trying to enjoy himself. And Pearl is trying very, very hard to hold herself together in the presence of the man who, in her mind, took everything from her. The episode builds slowly. There is tension between Pearl and Greg, the kind of tension that comes from two people who share a grief so enormous that neither of them knows how to talk about it. They both loved Rose. They both lost Rose. And they have never, in all the years since Rose became Stephen, actually spoken to each other about it. They have coexisted. They have cooperated for Stephen's sake. But they have not talked. Not really. Not about the thing that sits between them like a wall. And then night falls, and Pearl steps out onto the hotel balcony, and she sings. It's Over Isn't It Is, on the surface, a song about loss. Pearl is singing about Rose. She is singing about the fact that Rose is gone and she is still here, and she does not know what to do with that. But if you listen closely, if you really sit with the lyrics, the song is about something much more specific and much more devastating than simple grief. Pearl is not just mourning Rose. She is mourning herself. She sings about the war. She sings about the way she fought and bled and won, and how none of it mattered in the end because Rose chose Greg. She sings about watching Rose fall in love with someone else and having to stand there and accept it. She sings about the specific, unique agony of being the one who stays while the person you love turns to someone new, not because they stop loving you, but because their heart is big enough to hold more than you and yours is not. And that is the key. That is what makes it over. Isn't it so devastating? Pearl is not angry that Rose loved Greg. She is shattered by the realization that Rose's capacity for love was always larger than Pearl's capacity to receive it. Rose could love Pearl and Greg, and the earth and humanity, and every living thing all at once without contradiction. But Pearl could only love Rose. Pearl's entire heart, her entire self was built around one person, and that person's heart was built around the whole world. The song moves through stages. It begins with something close to resentment. Pearl recounts the way she fought for Rose, the things she endured. There is a hardness in the early lines, a sense of injustice. I did everything right, she is saying. I gave everything, and it was not enough. But as the song continues, the resentment softens into something else, something closer to bewilderment. Pearl is not just angry, she is confused. She genuinely does not understand how she could have done everything, sacrificed everything, and still not been the one Rose chose in the end. And then the song arrives at its emotional center, and Pearl asks the question that has been eating her alive for years. It is over, is it not? Why can she not move on? That question is not rhetorical. Pearl is genuinely asking. She knows intellectually that Rose is gone. She knows that the war is over, that the rivalry with Greg is pointless, that holding on to this grief serves no purpose. She knows all of this, and she cannot stop. She cannot let go, because letting go of Rose means letting go of the only version of herself she has ever valued. Pearl without Rose is just a Pearl, a servant without a master, a soldier without a war, a lover without a beloved. And she does not know who that person is. She has never had to find out. The animation during this sequence is extraordinary. Pearl stands on the balcony, looking out over the city, and she moves through the song with a dancer's precision. Every gesture is controlled, graceful, deliberate. Even in her most vulnerable moment, Pearl cannot stop performing. She cannot stop being beautiful. It is all she knows how to do. The form is perfect, even as the content is falling apart. And that contrast between the elegance of her movement and the devastation of her words is what makes the scene so powerful. Pearl is breaking, and she is breaking beautifully, because she does not know any other way to break. Stephen watches. He watches from inside the hotel room, through the glass doors, and his face carries the weight of a child who is seeing, for the first time, the full scope of an adult's pain. He does not fully understand it. He cannot. He is too young, and the love Pearl is describing is too old and too complicated for him to grasp entirely. But he understands enough. He understands that Pearl is hurting. He understands that his father is part of that hurt. And he understands that someone needs to do something, because these two people he loves are drowning in a grief they refuse to share. What Stephen does next is so simple that it is almost easy to overlook. He brings them together. He sits down at a piano and he plays, and he sings to both of them. And what he says, in essence, is this: you both loved her, you both lost her, and you are both still here. So maybe instead of carrying this separately, you could try carrying it together. It is a child solution. It is naive and earnest, and it should not work, but it does. Because Stephen is not asking Pearl and Greg to forgive each other. He is not asking them to forget Rose, or to stop hurting, or to pretend that everything is fine. He is asking them to look at each other and recognize what they have in common instead of what divides them. And what they have in common is enormous. They both loved the same extraordinary person. They both lost her, and they both have Stephen, who carries pieces of her that neither of them can reach alone. Pearl and Greg talk for the first time, really, and what emerges is not a resolution. It is not a neat, clean ending where all the pain disappears and everyone is friends. What emerges is something quieter and more honest than that. It is an acknowledgement. Pearl acknowledges that Greg loved Rose. Greg acknowledges that Pearl loved Rose. And in that mutual recognition, something shifts. The wall between them does not come down, but a door opens in it. A small door, barely wide enough for two grieving people to see each other through. Pearl begins to let go, not all at once, not completely. Letting go for someone like Pearl is not a single moment. It is a process. It is a series of small, painful choices made over and over again to loosen the grip on something that defined you. But the process starts here, on this balcony, in this hotel, in this city that neither of them has any connection to. It starts when Pearl sings her grief out loud and someone hears it. Not Rose, not a diamond, not a fellow soldier. Greg, the man she resented for years, the man she tried to drive away, the man who, it turns out, is the only other person in the universe who understands exactly what she has lost. There is a particular kind of healing that can only come from the person you thought was your enemy. When Pearl and Greg finally sit together in their shared grief, they are not becoming friends. They are becoming something harder to name. They are becoming two people who have agreed to stop pretending that the other one does not matter. And for Pearl, who has spent her entire existence defining herself in opposition to someone or something, this is revolutionary. She is not fighting Greg anymore. She is not competing with him. She is simply sitting next to him, in the quiet and letting the grief be what it is. That is what Mr. Gregg gives Pearl. Not closure, not peace, not a neat resolution, just the beginning of the possibility that she might, someday, be able to think about Rose without feeling like she is being torn apart. That she might someday be able to love someone without losing herself. That she might someday be able to exist as Pearl, just Pearl, without needing Rose to justify it. Someday, not yet, but someday. And that someday starts to take shape in one of the most unexpected episodes of the entire series. Last one out of Beach City airs in September of 2016, and on the surface, it is a comedy. Pearl, Steven, and Amethyst go to a rock show. Pearl is stiff, awkward, completely out of her element. She does not know what to wear. She does not know how to act. She does not know any of the music. She is in every possible way a fish out of water, and the episode plays this for warmth and gentle humour. But beneath the comedy, something profound is happening. Pearl is choosing to go out. She is choosing to do something that has nothing to do with Rose, nothing to do with the war, nothing to do with protecting Steven or saving the world. She is going to a rock show because Amethyst invited her, and because some part of her, some small, stubborn, newly awakened part, wants to try, wants to see what it feels like to do something simply because she wants to. This is enormous. Think about everything we have discussed about Pearl up to this point. Every decision she has ever made has been in service to someone else. She served the diamonds. She served Rose. She served Steven. She fought wars and guarded secrets and broke herself into pieces, and all of it, every single moment, was for someone else. Pearl does not have hobbies. Pearl does not have interests that exist outside of her relationships. Pearl does not, in any meaningful sense, have a life of her own. She has a purpose, and when that purpose is fulfilled or taken away, she has nothing. So when Pearl puts on a jacket and gets in a car and drives to a rock show, she is doing something she has almost never done before. She is living for herself, tentatively, awkwardly, with no idea what she is doing. But she is doing it, and then she sees the mystery girl. The mystery girl is tall. She has pink hair. She has a confident, easy smile, and a presence that takes up space without apology. She looks, in a word, like Rose. Not exactly like Rose. Not in the way that would suggest the show is being lazy or repetitive, but enough like Rose that the resemblance is impossible to ignore. And Pearl notices. Of course Pearl notices. This is where the episode becomes genuinely interesting, because it refuses to give you a simple answer. Is Pearl attracted to the mystery girl because she looks like Rose? Is Pearl just repeating a pattern, chasing the same silhouette, unable to break free of the gravitational pull of the person she lost? Or is something more nuanced happening? Is Pearl attracted to the mystery girl because the mystery girl represents a type, a kind of person Pearl is drawn to, and Rose happened to be the first example of that type, not the only one? The show does not answer this directly, and that restraint is one of its great strengths, because the truth is probably both. It is probably true that Pearl notices the mystery girl partly because she looks like Rose, and it is probably also true that Pearl's attraction is not purely about resemblance. The mystery girl is her own person. She is cool and relaxed and unbothered in a way that Rose never quite was. She does not carry the weight of a rebellion or a secret identity or a war. She is just a person at a rock show, living her life, and something about that simplicity draws Pearl in. What follows is a comedy of errors. Pearl tries to approach the mystery girl and fumbles spectacularly. She is nervous in a way we have never seen her be nervous before. Pearl, who faced down armies, who fought diamonds, who held together for thousands of years under the weight of an impossible secret, cannot figure out how to talk to a girl at a concert. She stammers, she stiffens, she overthinks every word. Amethyst and Steven watch with a mixture of amusement and genuine affection, cheering her on from the sidelines, and the whole thing is so human, so wonderfully, painfully human, that it is easy to forget Pearl is an alien construct made of light. And that is exactly the point. Pearl is being human. For the first time, she is experiencing something that humans experience all the time. The nervousness of attraction, the fear of rejection, the exhilarating, terrifying vulnerability of wanting someone and not knowing if they want you back. These are feelings Pearl has had before, with Rose, but with Rose everything was tangled up in duty and devotion and millennia of history. This is different. This is simple. This is just a person Pearl thinks is attractive, at a show Pearl chose to attend pretend in a life Pearl is trying to build. The episode ends with Pearl giving the mystery girl her phone number. It is a small moment. In the grand scope of a story about intergalactic war and the nature of identity, a phone number is almost comically insignificant. But for Pearl, it is seismic. It is the first time she has reached towards someone new. The first time she has allowed herself to want something that is not connected to Rose, or to the memory of Rose, or to the grief of losing Rose. It is the first time Pearl has looked at her own future and seen something other than an endless repetition of the past. Will anything come of it? The show never tells us definitively. The mystery girl does not become a major character. She does not replace Rose or fill the void Rose left. And that is fine. That is, in fact, the point. The phone number is not about the mystery girl. It is about Pearl. It is about the fact that Pearl was able to give it. That she was able to stand in front of someone new and say, in effect, I am interested in you. I would like to know you. I am available for something I have not experienced before. For a character who spent thousands of years defining herself entirely through her relationship to one person, this is not a small step. It is a reinvention. It is Pearl deciding, consciously or not, that she is allowed to want things, that she is allowed to be attracted to people, that she is allowed to have a life that extends beyond the boundaries of her grief. And notice what is absent from this episode. There is no crisis, there is no battle, no one is in danger. The stakes are entirely personal, entirely internal. The only thing at risk is Pearl's pride. And even that is handled with such gentleness that the episode feels less like a challenge and more like a gift. The show is giving Pearl a night off. A night where she does not have to be a warrior or a guardian or a grieving lover. She just gets to be a person at a rock show trying to talk to someone cute. That is what healing looks like. Not a dramatic transformation, not a single moment of catharsis that washes everything clean. Just a night out, just a phone number, just the quiet, almost imperceptible shift from I cannot live without her to maybe I can live as myself. Pearl is not over Rose. She may never be entirely over Rose, but she is learning, slowly, clumsily, beautifully, that there is a version of herself that exists independently of that love. A version that can go to concerts and wear jackets and feel nervous and give out phone numbers and drive home with a smile. It is not the end of Pearl's journey, not even close, but it is the first moment where the journey stops being about what she lost and starts being about what she might find. There is something quietly brilliant about the way Steven Universe uses fusion as a storytelling device. On the surface, fusion is spectacle. Two gems dance, they glow, they merge into something larger and more powerful. But underneath that spectacle is something far more vulnerable. Fusion in this show is intimacy made visible. It is a relationship you can see, a dynamic you can hold in your hands and examine from every angle. And no character reveals more through fusion than Pearl. Every fusion Pearl forms is a mirror, not of who she is fusing with, but of who she becomes when she is with them. And when you line those mirrors up side by side, what you get is a quiet, devastating map of Pearl's psychology, her fears, her desires, the things she cannot say out loud but cannot stop feeling. It begins with Opal. In the episode Giant Woman, which aired on February 24th, 2014, we see Pearl and Amethyst attempt to fuse for the first time on screen. And the thing that makes this moment so telling is how much they struggle. Pearl and Amethyst are, in almost every measurable way, opposites. Pearl is order, discipline, precision. Amethyst is chaos, instinct, impulse. Pearl plans. Amethyst improvises. Pearl folds her clothes. Amethyst eats them. The two of them trying to fuse is like watching someone try to thread a needle during an earthquake. It does not work because neither of them is willing to let go, and that is the key. Fusion requires surrender. It requires trust. It requires you to stop holding on to your own shape long enough to become part of something else. And for Pearl, that is terrifying. Pearl is a character who survives through control. She organizes, She categorizes. She keeps everything in its proper place because, on some deep level, she believes that if she stops holding things together, everything will fall apart. So when she tries to fuse with Amethyst, someone who represents the absence of control, she resists. She tightens. She holds on harder, and the fusion fails. But when Opal does finally form, she is extraordinary. Voiced by Amy Mann, Opal is graceful and composed, a four-armed archer who combines Pearl's spear and Amethyst's whip into an elegant bow. She is calm. She is balanced. She is everything Pearl and Amethyst are not when they are separate. And that is the quiet miracle of Opal. She is proof that Pearl's rigidity and Amethyst's wildness are not actually opposed. They are complementary. When Pearl stops trying to control Amethyst, and Amethyst stops trying to provoke Pearl, what emerges is something serene, something whole. But Opal is fragile. She is difficult to maintain precisely because the harmony she represents is so hard for Pearl and Amethyst to sustain. They fall apart easily. They lose the thread. And there is something honest about that. The show does not pretend that balance is easy. It does not suggest that Pearl can simply decide to let go and suddenly everything will be fine. Opal is aspirational. She is what Pearl and Amethyst could be if they tried, but trying is the hard part. Then there is Sardonyx, and Sardonyx is a very different kind of mirror. Sardonyx is the fusion of Pearl and Garnet. She is theatrical, she is dramatic, she is a showstopper who announces herself with flair and relishes every moment of attention she receives. Voiced by Alexia Kadime, Sardonyx is magnetic and larger than life. She speaks as though every sentence is the opening line of a stage performance. And at first, this seems like a strange combination. Garnet is stoic, Pearl is controlled. Where does all that theatrical energy come from? It comes from Pearl. Specifically, it comes from the part of Pearl that desperately wants to be seen, to be valued, to be important. When Pearl fuses with Garnet, she is not just combining their abilities, she is experiencing what it feels like to matter. Garnet is the leader. Garnet is the strongest. Garnet is the one everyone looks up to. And when Pearl fuses with her, Pearl gets to share in that. She gets to feel powerful and significant and worthy of attention. And that feeling is intoxicating. So intoxicating, in fact, that Pearl becomes addicted to it. In Cry for Help, Pearl secretly repairs a communication hub just so she and Garnet will have an excuse to fuse again. She manufactures crises so she can keep experiencing Sardonyx. She lies, she manipulates, she betrays Garnet's trust. And the reason she does all of this is because Sardonyx fills a void in Pearl that nothing else can. When she is Sardonyx, Pearl does not feel like a servant. She does not feel like a leftover. She feels like a star. This is one of the most psychologically acute storylines in the entire series, because what Pearl is doing with Sardonyx is essentially what she did with Rose. She is using a relationship to define her own worth. She is outsourcing her sense of self to someone else. The fusion is not a partnership, it is a dependency. And when Garnet discovers the truth, the betrayal is not just personal, it is existential. Because Garnet trusted Pearl to fuse honestly, and Pearl turned that trust into a tool for self-medication. The original Rainbow Quartz tells a different story entirely. We see her only in flashback in We Need to Talk, when Pearl fuses with Rose Quartz during a music video performance, and does so specifically to make Greg Universe jealous. This is Pearl at her most territorial. She is not fusing out of love or necessity or growth. She is fusing to send a message. She is saying, I can do this with her, and you cannot. I am part of her in a way you will never be. Rainbow Quartz, in that moment, is intimacy weaponized. She is beautiful and fluid and graceful, but she exists for a cruel purpose. Pearl is using fusion, the most vulnerable act two gems can share, as a power play. And the tragedy is that Rose goes along with it. Rose dances with Pearl and forms Rainbow Quartz and smiles, and you cannot tell if Rose understands what Pearl is doing, or if Rose simply does not care enough to stop it. Either way, it is painful. Either way, it reveals something about Pearl that Pearl herself may not fully understand. That her love for Rose is not just devotion, it is possession. And possession, no matter how beautifully it dances, is not the same as love. Years later, in Change Your Mind, the original series finale that aired on January 21st, 2019, Pearl fuses with Steven, and the result is Rainbow Quartz 2.0. Voiced by Alistair James, this new Rainbow Quartz is flamboyant, posh, and joyful, a sharp contrast to the original. And the difference is everything, because this fusion is not about jealousy, it is not about territory, it is not about proving anything to anyone. Rainbow Quartz 2.0 is Pearl and Steven choosing to work together, choosing to trust each other, choosing to combine their strengths because they genuinely want to. This is the healthiest fusion Pearl ever forms. And the reason it is healthy is because it is not built on need. Pearl does not fuse with Steven to fill a void, or to prove her worth, or to hold on to something she is afraid of losing. She fuses with Steven because she cares about him as his own person, not as a replacement for Rose, not as an extension of her grief, but as Steven. And that distinction, small as it might seem, represents thousands of years of emotional growth compressed into a single, shimmering moment. And then there is Mega Pearl. In Volleyball, the 4th episode of Steven Universe Future, Pearl fuses with Pink Pearl. The original Pearl, who served Pink Diamond before our Pearl, replaced her. The two of them merge, and what forms is something quiet and powerful. Mega Pearl is acceptance. She is what happens when Pearl stops running from the parts of her history that hurt the most. Pink Pearl represents everything Pearl tries not to think about. The fact that she was a replacement, the fact that Pink Diamond was capable of harm, the fact that the person Pearl loved was not always worthy of that love. Fusing with Pink Pearl means holding all of that at once. It means looking at the full picture and not turning away. Each of these fusions, taken together, tells the complete story of Pearl's inner life. Opal is the peace she cannot sustain. Sardonyx is the validation she craves. The original Rainbow Quartz is the possessiveness she mistakes for love. Rainbow Quartz 2.0 is the connection she earns. And Mega Pearl is the acceptance she finally reaches. They are chapters in an emotional autobiography that Pearl could never write in words. She can only dance it. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. In September of 2019, Steven Universe, the movie aired. It was a musical event, a celebration of everything the series had built over 5 seasons. And for Pearl, it was something else entirely. It was an erasure. The villain of the movie is Spinel, a gem abandoned by Pink Diamond in a garden and left there for 6,000 years. Spinel arrives on Earth with a weapon called a rejuvenator, a scythe-like blade that resets any gem. It strikes back to their factory settings, their original programming. The person they were before experience shaped them into who they are. Pearl is struck by the rejuvenator, and what happens next is one of the most unsettling things the show has ever done. Reset Pearl is cheerful. She is obedient. She is eager to please. She stands with her hands clasped, eyes wide, waiting for instructions. She asks who she belongs to. She does not have opinions. She does not have preferences. She does not have grief. She is a Pearl in the way Homeworld intended, a decorative servant, a living accessory, a pretty thing that does what it is told and never ever asks why. And the audience watches this and something inside you goes cold. Because you have spent 5 seasons getting to know Pearl, her pain, her pride, her fierce intelligence, her devastating love, her slow and agonizing growth, and now all of that is gone, stripped away in a single stroke. What remains is a shell, a smile with nothing behind it. This is the show making an argument, and the argument is this: identity is not innate. Pearl was not born complex. She was not designed to be brave or heartbroken or brilliant. She was designed to be empty. Everything she became, every scar, every song, every sleepless night spent staring at Rose's portrait, she built that. Experience built that. Love built that. Loss built that. And the rejuvenator takes it all away. And what is left is proof that without those experiences, Pearl is no one. Not because she is weak, but because selfhood is not a gift. It is a construction. It is something you assemble, piece by painful piece, out of everything that has ever happened to you. The process of restoring Pearl is On a narrative level, the show replaying its own thesis in miniature. Stephen has to help each of the crystal gems reconnect with the memories that made them who they are. For Garnet, it is love. For Amethyst, it is belonging. And for Pearl, it is grief. Think about that for a moment. The thing that restores Pearl is not her skill with a sword. It is not her knowledge of engineering, or her talent for strategy, or her physical grace. The thing that brings Pearl back is her grief over rose quartz. The memory of loving someone and losing them. The memory of standing in a room full of people and feeling completely alone because the only person who ever made her feel whole is gone. That is what makes Pearl real. That is the core of her identity. Not strength, not competence, grief. And there is something deeply honest about that choice. Because grief is not a flaw. It is not a weakness to be overcome. Grief is evidence. It is proof that you loved someone enough for their absence to reshape the geography of your entire inner life. Pearl's grief is not a problem to be solved. It is the foundation everything else is built on. Without it, she is just a pretty servant waiting for orders. With it, she is a person. A complicated, flawed, magnificent person who carries the weight of 10,000 years of feeling too much and pretends she is fine. Dee Dee Magno Hall's performance during this arc deserves its own recognition. Hall is a Filipino-American performer whose career began on the all-new Mickey Mouse Club in 1989. She performed in Miss Saigon on Broadway. She provides both the speaking and singing voice for Pearl, which means that every emotional register the character reaches, from cold fury to trembling vulnerability to soaring musical catharsis, comes from the same person. In the movie, Hall has to play two versions of Pearl. She has to play the reset Pearl, vacant, bubbly, hollow, and she has to play the moment when the real Pearl comes flooding back. The contrast between those two performances is staggering. Reset Pearl sounds like a customer service recording. Restored Pearl sounds like someone waking up from a nightmare and realizing the nightmare was real. Hall navigates that transition with a subtlety that would be impressive in live action, let alone in voice work for animation. And then there is the song. System/boot.pearl_final3.info is Pearl's restoration number, and even the title tells you something. It is written like a file name, like a computer process, like Pearl is a program being rebooted, and there is a quiet horror in that framing. The idea that Pearl's entire identity, all of her love and pain and growth, can be reduced to a file being loaded. But the song itself transcends that framing. It begins mechanical and disjointed, Pearl cycling through her programming, trying to find her purpose, and then the memories start to surface. Rose, the war, the choice to be free, and the song builds layer by layer from robotic repetition into something raw and aching and alive. Rebecca Sugar, the show's creator, has spoken about Pearl in terms that feel deeply personal. Sugar has said that Pearl represents a group dependency stage, a way of being in the world where your entire sense of self is filtered through your relationship to others. Sugar has described identifying with Pearl as a control freak, as someone who tries to manage the chaos of existence by holding everything tightly and refusing to let go. Sugar has even acknowledged that Pearl was based partly on her own overprotective relationship with her brother Stephen, the real Stephen, whose name the show borrows, and you can feel that personal investment in the movie's treatment of Pearl. The reset is not played for comedy. It is not a fun gimmick. It is a violation. The show treats the erasure of Pearl's identity with the gravity it deserves, because the show understands that Pearl's identity, messy, painful, inconvenient as it is sacred. It is the sum of everything she has survived, and no weapon, no matter how powerful, has the right to take that away. The grief is what makes her real. The show says this quietly, without fanfare, without underlining it, but it says it clearly. And if you are lying in the dark right now thinking about the things you carry, the losses that shaped you, the absences that taught you who you are, maybe there is something comforting in that. Maybe the weight you carry is not just weight. Maybe it is also proof. Proof that you loved. Proof that you lived. Proof that you are real. Steven Universe Future is a strange and necessary epilogue. It takes place after the movie, after the war, after the diamonds have been reformed and the empire has been dismantled, and the galaxy is, for the first time in recorded gem history, something approaching free. And in this new world, Pearl does something remarkable. She becomes a teacher. Little Homeschool is exactly what it sounds like. It is a school built in Beach City, run by the Crystal Gems, designed to help Homeworld Gems who have spent millennia under the rigid caste system of the Diamond Authority, learn how to live freely on Earth, how to choose their own paths, how to exist without someone telling them what to do every moment of every day, and Pearl helps run it. Let that settle for a moment. The former servant is teaching others how to be free. The gem who spent thousands of years defined entirely by her relationship to someone else is now standing in front of a classroom, helping others learn to define themselves. The gem who was designed to take orders is now teaching others that they do not have to. There is an irony in this that the show never underlines but never lets you forget. Pearl knows what it is like to be told your purpose. She knows what it is like to have your identity handed to you by someone more powerful, to have your worth measured entirely by your usefulness to someone else. She knows what it is like to stand in a room full of gems who are supposed to be better than you and smile and say nothing and pretend that the hierarchy makes sense. She knows all of this because she lived it. For thousands of years she lived it, and now she is using that knowledge, that pain, to help others avoid it. She is not teaching from theory, she is teaching from experience. Every lesson she gives about freedom and choice and self-determination is a lesson she had to learn the hard way, through war and loss and centuries of quiet, grinding grief. When she tells a former Homeworld gem that they can be whoever they want to be, she is not reciting a platitude. She is speaking from the deepest part of herself. She is saying, I know what it costs to believe this. I know how hard it is, but it is true and it is worth it. This is Pearl's true resolution. Not a romantic partner, not a replacement for Rose, not some dramatic final battle or climactic confrontation. Pearl's resolution is purpose. Quiet, unglamorous, deeply meaningful purpose. She finds her place in the world not by attaching herself to someone else, but by giving to others what she had to fight to find for herself. And there is something beautiful about the specificity of it. Pearl is not just generically helping people. She is teaching. She is organizing. She is using her precision and her discipline and her meticulous attention to detail. All the things that used to be symptoms of her anxiety and her need for control, and channeling them into something constructive. The same traits that once kept her trapped are now setting others free. The rigidity that used to be a cage becomes a scaffold. The control that used to be a defense mechanism becomes a curriculum. Rebecca Sugar has talked about Pearl representing group dependency, and Little Homeschool is the answer to that. It is Pearl learning that she can be connected to others without being consumed by them. She can care deeply about her students without needing them to complete her. She can give without losing herself in the giving. This is not the Pearl of 5,000 years ago, who poured every drop of herself into rose quartz and called it love. This is a Pearl who has learned the difference between devotion and self-destruction. A Pearl who has figured out slowly and painfully that you can hold someone close without disappearing into them. The character who could not exist without rose quartz learns to exist for herself. And then, having learned that, she turns around and teaches others to do the same. That is not just character development, that is redemption. Not redemption from villainy. Pearl was never a villain. Redemption from the quieter, more insidious prison of defining yourself entirely through someone else. Redemption from the belief that you are not enough on your own. Redemption from the lie that a Pearl is just a Pearl. She is so much more than that. She always was. It just took her 10,000 years to believe it. And maybe that is the thought to carry with you as you drift off tonight. That the things which once controlled you can become the things that set you free. That the pain you carry is not wasted. That somewhere, on the other side of all that grief, there is a classroom, and someone is waiting to learn what you already know. And then in season 5, the show does something it has been building toward for years. It pulls the thread that unravels everything. A Single Pale Rose, Episode 18 of Season 5, aired on May 7th, 2018, and nothing about Pearl is ever the same again. The premise is deceptively simple. Steven needs to know who shattered Pink Diamond. He has been circling this question for a long time, picking up fragments of the truth, sensing that something does not add up. and so he does the only thing he can think of. He goes to Pearl, but Pearl cannot tell him. She literally cannot. Every time she tries, her hands fly up to cover her mouth, an involuntary reflex that has played out across the entire series in moments so brief, most viewers barely registered them. Stephen has noticed though, and so he enters Pearl's gem to find the answer she cannot speak. What follows is one of the most structurally ambitious episodes the show ever attempts. Inside Pearl's gem, Stephen does not find a single memory or a simple archive. He finds layers, strata of identity, each one deeper than the last, each one guarded by a different version of Pearl. The surface layer is the Pearl we know now, confident, composed, the Pearl who has fought to rebuild herself. Go deeper, and there is the Pearl of the early crystal gems, fierce and devoted, sword in hand, ready to die for a cause she believes in. Deeper still, and there is the Pearl of the rebellion's earliest days, wide-eyed, uncertain, discovering for the first time that she might be more than what she was made to be. And then, at the very bottom, in the oldest and most buried memory of all, there is a Pearl who looks nothing like the person Stephen knows. A Pearl standing in a palanquin, hands clasped, eyes down, a servant. This is the moment. This is the memory Pearl has been unable to share. In the deepest layer of her gem, Stephen watches as Pink Diamond, not rose quartz, but Pink Diamond herself, in her original form, turns to Pearl and gives her an order. She tells Pearl to never speak of what is about to happen. She tells Pearl to keep this secret forever. And then Pink Diamond shapeshifts. She transforms her body, changes her form, and becomes Rose Quartz, the leader of the rebellion, the gem who supposedly shattered Pink Diamond, the gem who gave up her physical form to bring Stephen into the world. Rose Quartz was Pink Diamond. They were the same gem. The shattering never happened. It was a performance, a staged assassination designed to free Pink Diamond from Homeworld's expectations and allow her to live on Earth as someone new. And Pearl knew the entire time. From the very first episode to this one, Pearl has been carrying a secret that she was physically compelled to keep. The order Pink Diamond gave her was not a request. It was a command embedded in Pearl's very being, a function of the caste system that created her. Pearls are made to serve. When a diamond gives an order, a Pearl obeys. Not because she chooses to, but because she has no choice. Her body enforces the silence. Her hands cover her mouth before the words can form, and suddenly everything changes. Every single scene where Pearl's hands drifted toward her face, every moment where she started to say something and then stopped, every time she deflected a question about the past with a vague answer or a pained expression, all of it was this. All of it was the secret trying to claw its way out, and her body forcing it back down. The show has been hiding this in plain sight for 5 seasons. It was never a quirk or a character tick. It was a prison. Think about what that means for everything we have discussed so far. In Rose's Scabbard, when Pearl breaks down on the battlefield, she is not just mourning the loss of a leader. She is mourning someone who trusted her with an impossible burden and then disappeared, leaving Pearl alone with a truth she can never share. When Pearl tells Stephen that Rose kept things from everyone, even her, she is telling a half-truth, because Rose did share one devastating thing with Pearl, the biggest secret of all, and then sealed Pearl's lips shut so she could never process it with anyone else. In Sworn to the Sword, when Pearl projects her devotion onto Connie and teaches her to sacrifice herself for Stephen, she is not just replaying her love for Rose, she is replaying her relationship with a diamond. The hierarchy is encoded in her. A Pearl exists to serve. A Pearl exists to protect. A Pearl's life is worth less than the one she belongs to. These are not just feelings Pearl developed. They are directives that were built into her at creation, and even after thousands of years of fighting against them, they still surface in moments of stress. In the Sardonyx incident, when Pearl manipulates Garnet into fusing, her desperation takes on a new dimension. Pearl is not just lonely or insecure. She is someone who has spent millennia unable to tell the truth about the most important event in her life. She cannot be fully honest with anyone. The intimacy of fusion, the total openness it requires, is something Pearl can experience only through deception, because there will always be a wall inside her that she did not build and cannot tear down. Garnet sees Pearl's dishonesty as a betrayal, but Pearl's entire existence has been shaped by a dishonesty that was forced upon her. And it's over, isn't it? That song in Mr. Greg, that raw outpouring of grief. It is not just about losing Rose to Greg. It is about losing a diamond who chose to become someone else. Someone who fell in love with a human. Someone who eventually chose to become Stephen. Pearl lost Pink Diamond twice. Once when Pink Diamond became Rose Quartz, and again when Rose Quartz became Stephen. Both times the person Pearl devoted herself to chose to stop existing, and both times Pearl was left behind, unable to even explain why her grief runs so deep. A single pale rose does not just reveal a plot twist, it retroactively deepens every emotional beat the show has ever given Pearl. It transforms her from a character defined by grief into a character defined by silenced grief, which is something far more devastating. Grief you can speak is grief you can begin to process. Grief you are forbidden from voicing becomes a part of your architecture. It shapes the walls. It determines which rooms you can enter and which doors remain locked. Pearl has been living in a house built by someone else's secret, and she has never once been allowed to rearrange the furniture. The writing team at Cartoon Network earned something remarkable with this reveal. They did not simply shock the audience. They invited the audience to rewatch the entire series with new eyes. Every Pearl scene becomes richer, sadder, more layered. The twist does not invalidate what came before, it completes it. It is the missing piece that makes every earlier moment make more sense than it did the first time around. And so after thousands of years, the secret is out. Stephen knows, the other crystal gems know. The truth that Pearl carried alone for so long is finally shared. But here is the thing about truths that have been buried that deeply for that long. Releasing them is not the same as resolving them. The secret is out. But the question remains, what does Pearl do with the story now that she is finally allowed to tell it? The answer comes almost immediately in the very next episode. Now We're Only Falling Apart, episode 19 of season 5, aired on July 2nd, 2018, and it is, in its quiet way, one of the most important episodes in Pearl's entire arc, because this is the episode where Pearl does not just reveal the truth, she reframes it. The context is tense. Sapphire is furious. The revelation that Rose Quartz was Pink Diamond has shattered Sapphire's understanding of her own history. She joined the rebellion because she believed in Rose. She fused with Ruby because she believed in the cause. And now she learns that the leader she followed was the very authority she was rebelling against. It feels like a betrayal. It feels like the entire war was a lie. And this is where Pearl steps in, not as a servant, not as someone reciting facts she was ordered to memorize. Pearl steps in as a witness, the only witness, and she tells the story from the beginning, the real beginning. She tells Sapphire about Pink Diamond, not as a rebel leader, but as a young diamond who did not fit into the world she was born into. A diamond who wanted a colony and was given Earth, and then fell in love with the life she found there. A diamond who tried to convince the other diamonds to spare the planet and was ignored. A diamond who realized that the only way to save Earth was to stop being a diamond altogether. But here is the part that matters most. Pearl does not tell this story as a passive observer. She does not describe herself as a servant who simply followed orders. When Pearl recounts the origins of the rebellion, she makes something clear. She chose this. She chose to help Pink Diamond become Rose Quartz. She chose to support the deception. She chose the war. She chose the Earth. She chose all of it. The distinction is everything. There is a universe of difference between I was ordered to do this and I decided to do this. One is obedience, the other is agency, and Pearl is claiming agency. After all these years, after carrying the secret and the silence and the grief, Pearl is standing in front of Sapphire and saying, "This was not something that happened to me. This was something I participated in. I was not dragged into the rebellion. I walked in. I saw what Pink Diamond was trying to do and I believed in it and I chose to help." This is not Pearl minimizing the harm that was done to her. The gag order was real. The caste system was real. The fact that she was created to be property and treated as expendable, all of that is real. and none of it is erased by this moment. But Pearl is doing something that the show has been building toward since the very first season. She is refusing to let her origin define her entirely. She was made to be a servant. She was ordered to keep a secret, but she also chose to fight. She also chose to love. She also chose to stay on Earth long after the war ended, to raise Stephen, to build a life that no one designed for her. Now We're Only Falling Apart is the episode where Pearl stops being defined solely by what was done to her and starts being defined by what she did. The title itself captures it perfectly. They are only falling apart. The old narrative, the old framework, the version of the story where Pearl was a victim of circumstance. That version is falling apart, and what emerges in its place is something more complicated and more honest. Pearl was both constrained and free. She was both ordered and choosing. She was both a servant and a revolutionary. These things are not contradictions, they are the full picture. Sapphire needed to hear this. The audience needed to hear it too, because up until this point, it would have been easy to reduce Pearl's story to a single note. She was used, she was silenced, she was left behind. And all of that is true, but it is not the whole truth. The whole truth includes Pearl's courage, her conviction, her willingness to risk everything for a planet she fell in love with. The whole truth includes the fact that Pearl, a gem created to stand still and look pretty, chose to pick up a sword and fight a war against the most powerful beings in the universe. That is not the story of a victim. That is the story of someone who found something worth fighting for and fought for it, even when the cost was enormous. Even when the person she fought beside eventually left her behind. Pearl chose. And in this episode, she finally gets to say so. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But the truth Pearl reclaims in Now We're Only Falling Apart is not the end of her reckoning. There is one more confrontation waiting for her, and it might be the most difficult one of all. Because up until now, Pearl has been grappling with what was done to her and what she chose. She has not yet had to grapple with what Rose did to others. Volleyball, the 4th episode of Steven Universe Future, aired on December the 7th, 2019, and it introduces a character the show has been hinting at for years. Pink Pearl, Pink Diamond's original Pearl, the Pearl who served Pink Diamond before our Pearl ever existed. Pink Pearl appears with a crack across her face, a scar, and when Steven asks what happened, the answer is not what anyone expects. Pink Pearl explains that the damage came from Pink Diamond herself, from one of Pink Diamond's tantrums. Pink Diamond was not always the gentle, loving rose quartz that our Pearl remembers. She was also a diamond, powerful, immature, capable of explosive outbursts. And in one of those outbursts, she damaged her own Pearl so severely that the scar never fully healed. This is the moment where Pearl has to sit with something deeply uncomfortable. The person she loved, the person she devoted her entire existence to, the person she chose to follow into war and beyond, that person hurt someone. Not abstractly, not as a distant consequence of political decisions, but directly, physically. Pink Diamond's temper left a permanent mark on another living being, and that being was a Pearl, someone just like her. The episode does not let Pearl look away from this. It does not offer easy comfort or convenient excuses. Pink Pearl's scar is visible, undeniable, present in every frame, and our Pearl has to reconcile the Rose she loved with the Pink Diamond who did this. She has to hold both of those truths at the same time. That Rose was someone worth loving, and also someone capable of causing harm. What makes volleyball so remarkable is that it does not ask Pearl to stop loving Rose. It does not frame the revelation as a reason to reject everything Pearl felt. Instead, it asks Pearl to love Rose honestly, to love her as a complete person, not as an idealized memory, to accept that devotion does not require blindness, that you can grieve someone and miss someone and still acknowledge that they were flawed, that the person who changed your life and gave you purpose was also the person who hurt someone else in ways that can never be undone. The resolution of the episode comes through fusion. Our Pearl and Pink Pearl fuse together, forming Mega Pearl. Both Pearls, the one who was hurt by Pink Diamond's temper and the one who was silenced by Pink Diamond's command, merge into a single being. It is a moment of shared understanding, of two gems who were both shaped by the same person recognizing that their experiences, while different, not are connected. Dee Magno Hall, who voices Pearl throughout the series, voices both Pearls in this episode, the same actor playing both sides of this conversation. The Pearl who loved Rose and the Pearl who was hurt by Pink Diamond, speaking through the same voice, because in the end, they are two reflections of the same complicated truth. Pearl loving Rose does not require Pearl to pretend Rose was faultless. This is perhaps the most mature thing the show ever says about love, and it says it through Pearl. You can love someone completely and still see them clearly. You can hold devotion and honesty in the same hand. You can grieve the absence of someone and simultaneously acknowledge that their presence was not always gentle. These are not contradictions. They are what love looks like when it grows up. And that is what Pearl has been doing across this entire series, growing up. Not in the literal sense she is thousands of years old, but in the emotional sense. She started as someone who could not separate her identity from the person she served. She defined herself through Rose, through devotion, through sacrifice, through silence. And piece by piece, episode by episode, she learned to exist outside of that framework. She learned that she is allowed to grieve without being consumed by it. She learned that she is allowed to love without being erased by it. She learned that her worth is not determined by who she belongs to because she does not belong to anyone. Rebecca Sugar, the creator of Steven Universe, once said that Pearl is not defined by the relationship she is in. Sugar also identified personally with Pearl, describing her as a control freak, someone who tries to manage the chaos of her emotions by holding everything tightly. And you can feel that understanding in every frame of Pearl's story. This is not a character written from the outside. This is a character written by someone who knows what it feels like to build your identity around another person and then have to learn, slowly and painfully, that you are still someone when they are gone. Pearl's story is, in the end, about permission. Permission to exist outside of the person you loved. Permission to stop performing your grief as proof of your devotion. Permission to be more than a monument to someone else's memory. Grief is not an identity. Devotion is not the same as self-erasure. And the silence that Pearl carried for so long, that silence we began with all those words ago, it was never who she was. It was what was done to her. Who she is, it turns out, is the person who kept going after the silence was broken. The person who chose to fight, chose to love, chose to stay, chose to grow. The person who stood at the edge of everything she knew and decided, again and again, that she was worth more than the role she was given. And maybe that is the thought to carry with you as you drift off, that you are allowed to be more than the things that shaped you, that the people you love do not have to be perfect for your love to mean something. That silence does not last forever, and that somewhere, on the other side of all that quiet, there is a version of you that is still worth meeting. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next.